The investigator's voice was steady, but the weight behind his words was impossible to ignore. The person who did this, they live here or they know this place well. Someone in this community knows the truth. Someone has been carrying this secret for years. Can you really sleep at night knowing a 16-year-old girl lost her life, and the person responsible may still be walking among you? Those words hung in the air like a warning. They were meant for anyone who had even the slightest suspicion. Anyone who had stayed quiet for too long. This is the story of a cold, dark evening that changed a peaceful English town forever. It's a story about a young girl who had her whole future ahead of her, and a community haunted by fear, confusion, and unanswered questions for more than 20 years. Dartford, Kent. January 18, 1993. A Monday night that seemed ordinary, until it wasn't. Clare Tiltman was only 16. Bright, friendly, full of life, loved dearly by her parents Cliff and Linda. She had just celebrated her birthday 4 days earlier. Cake, gifts, laughter, everything a teenager would look forward to. That evening she stepped out of her home in Greenhithe, planning to walk to her friend Victoria's house. They had been talking about their futures, college plans, GCSE exams, big dreams that felt so close. Clare loved walking, and even when Victoria's mother offered her a lift, she smiled and said she preferred to go on foot. It was a short walk. A route she knew well. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. She continued down London Road toward a railway underpass known by locals as the Arches. The traffic hummed nearby. The cold air carried the scent of damp concrete. Street lights flickered in patches across the pavement. Close to the roundabout she turned into a narrow alley, a shortcut she had taken many times before. The passage was dim, quiet, and tight with tall walls on both sides. A place that felt safe. Until the moment it wasn't. Somewhere in that darkness someone was waiting. The attack came fast. Too fast. A figure lunged toward her from behind, armed with a large knife. The blows were violent, repeated, and fueled by a kind of rage that made no sense. Each strike landed with brutal force. In seconds Clare was wounded again and again, the knife cutting deep, so deep that some wounds almost went straight through her body. Why her? Why so violent? Was she targeted? Or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? The killer slipped back into the night as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Clare bleeding on the cold ground. But she wasn't ready to give up. Clare pushed herself forward. She staggered out of the alley, each breath sharp, each step heavy. Somehow she made it back toward the main road, hoping anyone would see her. At around 6:40 p.m., Michael Godfrey was driving down London Road with his colleague Ron. The headlights cut through the misty darkness. As they approached the entrance of the alley, Michael spotted something that made his stomach drop. Someone on their hands and knees struggling to breathe. He pulled over immediately. Michael ran toward the figure and what he found froze him in place. A teenage girl, barely conscious, her clothes soaked with blood. At first he thought it might be a hit and run. She was near the road after all. But when he gently checked her back, expecting to find bruises or injury from a car impact, he found nothing. Then he saw the blood bubbling at her mouth. The deep wounds across her chest. The terror in her half-open eyes. This wasn't an accident. Someone had attacked her. Someone had meant to end her life. Ron sprinted toward a nearby pub to call for an ambulance, leaving Michael alone with the girl who was fighting for every breath. Clare's breathing grew weak. Then he stopped. Michael didn't hesitate. Right there on the cold pavement he pressed his hands to her chest and began CPR, refusing to let her slip away. He spoke softly, trying to keep her connected to the world, telling her she wasn't alone. The ambulance arrived quickly. Paramedics rushed in, cutting open Clare's jacket and shirt to reach the wounds. Under the harsh streetlights, the full extent of the violence became painfully clear. Too many deep wounds. Too much bleeding. Too little time. Despite every effort, Clare's injuries were too severe. Just before 7 p.m., 4 days after her 16th birthday, Clare Tiltman passed away on the roadside. Michael never forgot that moment. Years later he still hoped that in her final seconds, Clare felt that someone was there with her, that she didn't leave this world alone. News of the attack spread through Dartford and Greenhithe within hours. It was a place where children walked to school, where people greeted their neighbors, where nothing like this ever happened. Not here. Not to someone so young. That night, parents brought their children inside early. People locked their doors, checked their windows, and whispered to each other about the killer who had disappeared into the darkness. At Dartford Grammar School for Girls, the morning of January 19th was one of heartbreak. The students were in the middle of mock exams and the school was operating on a mixed schedule. Some girls had heard a brief report on the radio that a 16-year-old girl had been killed nearby, but no one knew who it was. A teacher quietly turned off the radio the moment the story repeated. She already feared the truth. A police liaison officer and the head of Clare's year gathered her classmates in a single room. The head of year looked pale and shaken as she tried to speak. Several times she wiped her eyes. Then finally she said the words no one ever expected to hear. Clare was gone.
The room fell silent for a moment, an impossible heavy silence, before the sobbing started. Some girls cried openly. Others stared ahead, numb. Friends clung to each other, refusing to believe what they were hearing. Clare was the bright one. The funny one. The girl they called Tilts. She had been there with them just the day before, smiling, laughing, planning her future. Now she was another name in a breaking news bulletin, and a growing mystery in the heart of Kent. And somewhere out there the person who did this was still free. Friends remembered Clare as the kind of girl who lit up every room she entered. She had a warm smile, a sharp sense of humor, and a personality that drew people in. She loved music, especially bands like INXS and Queen, and she spent most of her free time laughing with friends, dancing, or planning for the future she was so excited about. She had just finished her mock exams and was thinking seriously about college. That night she had been on her way to talk about those plans with her friend Vicky when everything changed. But Clare's dreams reached far beyond grades and college forms. She wanted to be a firefighter, a goal that surprised many people in the early 1990s when there were very few women in the fire service. Clare didn't care about that. She was brave, determined, and loved the idea of helping others. She even volunteered at the local Dartford fire station as part of her Duke of Edinburgh award. Her parents, Cliff and Linda, supported her completely. They adored their daughter and she adored them. Anyone who knew the Tiltman family said their bond was unusually close. A small but beautifully strong family of 3. And in just one night that world collapsed. As grief spread through the community, Kent police moved fast. A full-scale murder investigation launched that same night, named Operation Artist. Dozens of officers were assigned, working around the clock. The alleyway where Clare was attacked was quickly sealed off with police tape, and forensic teams searched the narrow space inch by inch. They combed through the cold ground and damp walls, looking for anything. A knife, a footprint, a drop of blood, a fiber, that could help them understand what had happened. But there was almost nothing. The attack had taken place in a dark, quiet alley, and the killer had likely worn gloves. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found. No one had seen the stabbing itself. DNA science in 1993 was limited, and without blood or clear biological evidence from a suspect, there wasn't much to test. All investigators really had were the marks of violence left on Clare and a scattering of her blood trailing out of the alley. The pathologist later confirmed that Clare had been attacked from behind while her jacket was still zipped. She never saw her killer. She never had time to turn around. The speed and rage behind the attack suggested that this wasn't an attempted robbery or a chance encounter that went wrong. Whoever did this came ready to take a life. With little forensic evidence, detectives shifted their focus to witnesses and behavior patterns. Officers went door to door along London Road and the nearby residential streets, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything unusual around 6:30 p.m. More than 1,500 statements were collected. Dozens of calls came in from people shaken by the news, wanting to help however they could. One early theory investigators considered was whether Clare might have known her attacker. In many crimes involving young victims, the offender is someone familiar. Someone with an unhealthy interest, a secret anger, or a hidden obsession. Clare had no enemies. She was well-liked, friendly, and had never mentioned concerns about anyone. Still, investigators felt they had to explore every possibility. If she knew the person, maybe she wasn't surprised to see them in the alley. Maybe she was lured there. Or maybe the attacker had watched her and waited for an opportunity. Police began compiling a long list of people in Clare's life. Friends, classmates, neighbors, relatives, even anyone who had approached her recently. They were looking for any signs of violence, unpredictable behavior, or motive. Meanwhile, fear swallowed the community. A random attack felt even more terrifying than one with a clear motive. Parents no longer let their children walk alone. Teenagers who once strolled to school now begged for rides. The quiet routines of Greenhithe and Dartford were suddenly filled with tension and suspicion. Police increased patrols around the area. Local newspapers offered a reward of £1,000 for information leading to an arrest, a significant sum at the time. The streets felt different. More watchful, more nervous, as if everyone was looking over their shoulder. A few early sightings finally gave investigators something to consider. Several witnesses reported seeing a man in a light-colored jacket walking along London Road around the time Clare was attacked. His behavior seemed hurried or strange to some of the witnesses. It was dark, making details difficult to recall, but the pale or beige jacket stood out. Police could not identify the man and they urged him, or anyone who recognized him, to come forward. Was he simply passing by? Or had they unknowingly spotted the killer leaving the scene? As days passed with no arrest, the case gained national attention. Newspapers across the country covered Clare's story. A friendly, bright teenage girl murdered on her way to see a friend. It was the kind of tragedy that touched people everywhere. Pressure mounted on the police to find answers quickly before the killer disappeared or harmed someone else. Then detectives discovered something that sent a chill down everyone's spine. Clare's murder might not have been the first attack of its kind. In fact, a few years earlier, another violent knife assault had taken place not far from Greenhithe, an attack disturbingly similar in nature. And suddenly, investigators were forced to consider whether Clare's killer had struck before. On December 21, 1988, just 4 years before Clare's life was taken, another young woman in the same region suffered a terrifying attack that would later haunt investigators. She was 27, a young mother trying to make ends meet, walking home alone after finishing a late-night shift. It was quiet. The streets were empty. Most of the town was asleep. She walked through Swanscombe, only a couple of miles from Greenhithe, unaware that someone dangerous was watching her in the dark. Out of the shadows, a man appeared. He held a knife in one hand and a small gun in the other. Before she could run or scream, he forced her to walk with him to a lonely chalk quarry on the edge of town. The quarry was cold, silent, and forgotten, the kind of place where even the wind felt trapped. There, the attacker began a long and brutal assault that seemed to come from a place of pure cruelty. He gagged her by stuffing handfuls of toilet paper into her mouth. He used the knife to cut her clothes off while she begged for help she couldn't voice. Then he forced her into strange, humiliating positions and took photographs of her with a camera he had brought with him. The scene didn't feel like a robbery or a moment of panic. It felt planned. It felt like he had done this in his mind many times before. While she lay shaking and terrified, he stabbed the ground with the knife again and again, inches from her head, as if trying to show how easily he could end her life. He tried to force himself on her, but he couldn't go through with it. What happened next was even worse. He wrapped a school tie tightly around her neck and tried to choke her. She kicked and fought, but the tie snapped under pressure. This only seemed to make him angrier. He stabbed her 5 times in the back and left her bleeding in the freezing dirt. Believing she was dead, he covered her with soil and debris, leaving her half buried at the bottom of the quarry. He walked away without looking back. Somehow she survived. Hours later, just before sunrise, she woke up cold and in agony. She didn't know where she was at first. She didn't know how much time had passed. But she understood one thing clearly: she wasn't safe. Somehow, through pain that would have stopped anyone else, she crawled out of the shallow grave and dragged herself down the side of the quarry until she reached a small area where early morning workers were starting their shift. When they saw her, pale, shaking, and covered in dirt and blood, they ran to get help without hesitation. Doctors later said it was a miracle she lived. She spent days in intensive care fighting fever, infection, and trauma. Even after the physical wounds healed, the memory of that night stayed with her forever. Police investigated the attack, but the scene was remote and empty. There were no fingerprints, no weapon, no footprints useful enough to trace. The young mother described her attacker as a man with dark curly hair, maybe in his late teens or early 20s. She told police about the knife, the gun, the school tie, the camera. But without someone to match the description or evidence left behind, the case slowly faded away. People tried to believe it was a one-time nightmare, something that would never happen again. But in 1993, as detectives looked at Clare's case, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Two women attacked while walking. Both in the same small region. Both assaulted with shocking violence. Both stabbed multiple times. Both targeted alone in quiet places. Neither crime had a clear motive. And the cruelty in both cases felt personal, almost the same handwriting of fear. Detectives whispered the question among themselves before saying it out loud. Could the same man be responsible for both attacks? Had he tried to kill in 1988 and failed, only to succeed years later with Clare? The idea that a dangerous attacker might still be living quietly somewhere nearby terrified everyone. If he had struck twice, what would stop him from doing it again? On the day after Clare's death, January 19th, police received a phone call that grabbed their attention. A man said he had been driving through Greenhithe around the time Clare was attacked. He claimed he saw someone suspicious, a man with dark curly hair, standing near a zebra crossing not far from the alley. According to him, it was around 6:30 p.m., the same time Clare was believed to have been attacked. He told officers that the man looked uneasy or out of place, and he wondered if it might be connected. It wasn't much, but in a case with almost no leads, any detail mattered. Detectives interviewed him a week later, hoping for a clearer picture. But the witness's story changed. Now he said he had been in the area earlier, around 5:45 to 5:55 p.m., and he only saw someone walking along London Road. He didn't mention a crossing or curly hair this time. He added that he had been delivering political leaflets with his mother, who was a local councillor, and that they went home soon after. The shift in times and details made detectives uneasy. Was he confused, nervous, or hiding something? His mother's position in the community made his story sound believable. And the two of them gave each other an alibi for the exact time of the murder. Still, the inconsistency stayed in the back of investigators' minds. They kept moving forward, but progress remained slow. Clare's life was normal and simple. She wasn't in trouble. She didn't have enemies. She didn't have a secret relationship or anything that would point to someone close to her. Everything suggested she was attacked by a stranger, and stranger crimes are among the hardest to solve. Weeks went by. The Tiltman family lived in a fog of grief. Clare's parents, Cliff and Linda, moved through each day in a quiet, broken way. Their home, once full of laughter, now felt cold and silent. The worst part was the not knowing. Somewhere out there, the person who took their daughter's life was still breathing, still walking, still eating meals, still sleeping in a warm bed. On February 9th, Clare's funeral took place. The chapel overflowed with more than 200 people. Friends, teachers, neighbors, firefighters who had worked alongside her, and strangers who had only seen her smiling photo in the news. The room felt heavy and many people cried openly. Clare had celebrated her 16th birthday at the local British Legion Club just days before her death. Now the same people who sang birthday songs for her were singing goodbye. Some detectives attended quietly. They stood in the back watching the crowd, searching for anything unusual. Sometimes the person responsible for the crime wants to see the effect of what they've done. Sometimes they blend into the crowd, pretending to mourn. After the service, mourners gathered at the British Legion Club, the place Clare knew so well. Her parents bravely spoke a few words about her, remembering her kindness and her dreams. But they also admitted a thought that had been haunting them from the moment their daughter died. They looked around the room and wondered if the person who ended her life was standing there with them, pretending to grieve like everyone else. The idea was heartbreaking and terrifying, but it wasn't impossible. Linda Tiltman kept her hands tightly folded in her lap, trying to steady herself, but even hours after the funeral, she couldn't stop replaying the same disturbing thought. She looked around at the faces in the church that morning. Neighbors, relatives, old teachers, people she had known for years. And she felt something she never expected to feel in a place of mourning. Fear. Because deep down, Linda believed the person who hurt her daughter might have been standing right there with everyone else. She didn't know why the feeling was so strong, but she couldn't push it away. Every unfamiliar face seemed suspicious. Every glance that lingered too long made her heart race. Even the sound of someone clearing their throat made her turn around, wondering who they were and why they were there. Cliff felt the same. He tried to focus on the ceremony, tried to listen to the hymns and prayers, but his mind kept drifting toward the crowd. No parent should ever bury their child, he whispered afterward, his voice cracking under the weight of his grief. He and Linda didn't want to think like investigators. They didn't want to scan the room for danger. But they couldn't stop themselves. What kind of person could end a young girl's life and then stand quietly among mourners, pretending to share their pain? The thought was unbearable yet impossible to ignore. Linda's grief, raw and sharp, spurred a fierce determination inside her. She made it clear, even in her soft, trembling voice, that she could never forgive whoever did this. "There is no reason, no excuse," she said, looking down at her hands as if holding on to the last bit of strength she had left. "That person must be caught. They must face justice." She wasn't a vengeful woman and neither was Cliff. But some acts cut too deep to ever heal without answers. That same night, Kent police renewed their appeal to the public. Cameras flashed as officers stepped forward to address the community. They begged anyone with information, any small detail, any uneasy feeling, to come forward. One officer spoke directly to the fear many people tried hard to ignore. "No one wants to imagine that someone close to them could be capable of something like this," he said. "But if you noticed anything, strange behavior, missing items, a sudden change in mood, please search your conscience. A person who can do something this violent once may do it again." For the first time, the message felt truly chilling. Because police weren't sure if this was an isolated attack. They didn't think it was. And sadly, they were right. Before long, Claire's case was featured on a national program known for reconstructing unsolved crimes. The show aimed to jog memories, spark tips, and bring justice to families who waited in the dark. To honor Claire, they rebuilt her final walk, using real fire and ambulance crews who had been at the scene that night. Some of her classmates even helped, trying to show the country exactly how a normal walk home turned into a nightmare. The presenter's voice carried a weight that stayed with viewers long after the episode ended. He described the murder as a killing for the sake of killing, highlighting how senseless and terrifying the attack truly was. Police added something important on the show, something many people had not known. The weapon was a large knife. Not something small or easily carried. Something bigger. Something someone would have chosen on purpose. Investigators believed the killer might have an obsession with knives, an interest that went beyond curiosity. Even after the broadcast, the case remained unsolved. Tips came in, but none led to a definitive breakthrough. Winter turned into spring, spring into summer, and eventually an entire year passed. Each anniversary felt heavier than the last. The Tiltmans held on to hope, but the edges of that hope grew frayed with time. And then the day everyone feared arrived. On October 17, 1995, almost 2 years after Claire's death, a 22-year-old woman named Charlotte Barnard walked alone under a bridge near a place locals called the Arches. The structure, dark and echoing, stood only a short distance from where Claire had been attacked. The area wasn't usually dangerous, but at night the shadows felt endless. Charlotte didn't hear footsteps behind her. She didn't sense danger. Not until a hand clamped over her arm and yanked her sideways. A man dragged her off the path and across the road with terrifying strength. Hidden from view, surrounded by the cold walls of an abandoned yard, Charlotte felt the first blow before she even saw the knife. Pain exploded across her side. Another stab followed. Then another. And another. 14 times the blade came down on her, fast and wild. She fought back instinctively, shielding her chest, twisting, trying to stay upright. But she felt herself growing weak, her legs giving way. Fear filled her mind, fear that this was the end. She thought of her family. She thought of her future slipping away. Then, in a split-second decision, she screamed as loudly as she could and collapsed, letting her body go limp. The attacker froze. Maybe he thought someone heard. Maybe he panicked. Or maybe the sight of her falling made him think she was no longer a threat. Whatever his reason, he ran. Charlotte survived. Barely. She later told detectives she hadn't seen his face clearly. Just the knife. Just the strikes. Just the terror. But one witness did see something. A neighbor heard the scream and looked out their window. They saw a figure running. Another witness spotted a car speeding away from the area. A white Ford Capri. Not a common vehicle at all. The details stuck out immediately to investigators. Because the moment they heard white Ford Capri, one name surfaced. Colin Ashsmith. He wasn't a stranger to the investigation. When Claire died in 1993, he had already been interviewed more than once. Not because of solid evidence, but because he lived nearby, moved in Claire's social circles, and had a reputation that made police uneasy. Colin wasn't an outsider. He wasn't a drifter. He He wasn't someone people whispered about in the street. In fact, he came from a respected family. His mother was a local counselor and later became the mayor. His father had also served in public office. On the surface, Colin was a normal young man, polite, soft-spoken, working simple jobs and living with his parents in a quiet neighborhood. But beneath that normal image was something unsettling. He was widely known, for his obsession with knives. He carried them everywhere. He collected them. He showed them off to friends as if they were trophies. Some people thought it was strange. Others thought it was dangerous. Police took notice. When Claire's life was taken, Colin's name was added to the list of people they needed to question. Not because of hard facts, but because of the feeling that something about him simply didn't fit right. And now another attack had occurred. Same area. Same type of weapon. And the same unusual car. The frightening possibility was becoming very real. This was not random. This was a pattern. And the person responsible was still walking free. The investigation circled back to a familiar name. For 2 years, detectives had questioned him, watched him, and wondered if he was hiding something far darker than anyone imagined. His answers were always calm. His face stayed neutral. And his story never changed. Colin Ashsmith insisted he had nothing to do with the night Clare was taken. Back in 1993, when officers first interviewed him, he told them he had been out delivering political leaflets with his mother, Diane Ashsmith, a local council member. He claimed they wrapped up around 6 in the evening, long before Clare left her grandparents' house to walk toward the alley. Diane supported her son completely. She told officers she remembered Colin being with her the entire time. With no physical evidence to contradict the alibi, police had to let him go. At that time he was just one name among dozens. Nothing more. But now, October 1995, everything changed. A second young woman had been attacked with a large knife only a few hundred yards from where Clare was found. A witness had seen a white Ford Capri speeding away. And that one detail pointed straight back to the same man police had once wondered about. Colin owned a white Ford Capri. That car was unusual, easy to recognize, and exactly the kind of vehicle neighbors would remember. The moment the description came through, detectives moved. They brought Colin in again. Not as a person of interest. Not for a friendly conversation. This time as the prime suspect in a new attack that looked painfully similar to Clare's murder. A search warrant followed. Inside the Ashsmith family home at 14 Myrtle Place, officers entered Colin's bedroom and made the discovery that changed everything. In a hidden spot, police found a large knife. Later forensic testing would confirm it beyond doubt. This was the knife used to stab Charlotte Barnard under the arches. The same knife described by surgeons. The same weapon witnesses believed the attacker carried. But the knife wasn't the only thing Colin was hiding. Detectives also uncovered several handwritten diaries and notebooks. They dated back years, some even to the late 1980s. And when investigators opened them, they realized they were not dealing with a man who occasionally became violent. They were reading the thoughts and memories of a serial predator who had been hunting for nearly a decade. Each page revealed something darker. In one entry, Colin described an attack in 1988 in chilling detail. The quarry assault on a young mother that had almost faded from public memory. He wrote about that night as if it were an achievement, calling it his masterpiece. He rated it 95% successful, explaining how he had forced the woman at gunpoint, taken photos, tried to strangle her, and stabbed her before leaving her for dead. He wrote with frustration that he later learned she had survived. He wanted his attacks to be final. In another entry, he detailed a failed attempt to break into a retirement home to hurt elderly victims. He mocked himself for the failure, rating it only 20% successful. In yet another, he described planning to attack a lone woman at a deserted railway station. He had worked out every step, from how he'd grab her to where he would leave her, but claimed he lost his nerve at the last second. He called himself lucky. He said she was lucky too. Lucky for her I did, he wrote, almost amused with himself. Then there were the entries about how others saw him. Colin wrote that his friends jokingly nicknamed him the Swanscombe Psycho, after the 1988 attack made local news. They teased him, thinking it was harmless fun, never knowing they were far closer to the truth than they ever imagined. Colin bragged in his diary, "In the end, I got away with it." He even admitted something investigators had never known. After the 1988 attack, he had anonymously called the police himself. He gave them misleading information. And then he made a threat. He said that if the victim ever gave a description of him, he would hurt a schoolgirl. 5 years later, Clare, a schoolgirl, was stabbed to death in a sudden, brutal attack. Detectives could not ignore that chilling connection. The evidence continued piling up. Inside Colin's white Ford Capri, investigators found a piece of the school tie used during the 1988 attack. The same tie that snapped while he tried to strangle the victim. He had kept it as a trophy. They also found clothing hidden away with bloodstains on it, items Colin had saved for reasons only he understood. And faced with overwhelming proof, Colin finally confessed. He admitted to the 1988 quarry attack. He admitted to the 1995 stabbing of Charlotte Barnard. He admitted to carrying out the very crimes he had bragged about in his journals. But he never confessed to Clare. Not in his diaries. Not in interviews. Not even when caught for 2 other attacks. Clare's name never appeared, not once. Whether he avoided writing it because he didn't want to link himself to a murder or because he enjoyed keeping that secret locked inside himself, investigators never knew. But his silence didn't clear him. It only made police more certain that he was hiding something. On December 20, 1996, at the age of 25, Colin Ashsmith was sentenced to 3 life sentences for the attacks he had confessed to. He was categorized as extremely dangerous. A predator who needed to be kept away from the public for as long as possible. During sentencing, more disturbing details came out. Colin explained almost casually what pushed him into the 1995 attack. He said he believed his girlfriend was seeing someone else. When he arrived late to pick her up from work and couldn't find her, he convinced himself she had left with another man. His anger built. He drove around aimlessly, looking for someone to punish for the storm brewing inside him. He admitted he almost targeted a man first, but then changed his mind. "I thought a woman will do," he said. He told the court that after stabbing Charlotte and watching her fall, he felt relief. Her survival didn't matter to him. Whether she lived or died was irrelevant. He simply wanted to unleash his rage on someone defenseless. And after the attack, he went home, cleaned up, hid the knife, and then went to a pub to play pool, acting as if nothing had happened. By 1996, officers were certain they had the right man for Clare's murder too. Everything matched. The style of attack, the location, the sudden violence, the weapon, the lack of motive. Clare's case fit as the deadly crime between his 1988 and 1995 attacks. But court doesn't operate on intuition. It requires proof. And in 1996, investigators still didn't have the forensic evidence they needed to charge him for Clare. Still, detectives kept digging. They looked again at every detail of Colin's life around the time Clare died. That's when they discovered something unsettling. Colin had attended Clare's funeral. He stood among the grieving crowd wearing a light beige jacket. It was the same type of jacket described by witnesses who saw a man near the alley on the night of the murder. The sight of him standing there, beside Clare's parents acting like any other mourner, took on a much darker meaning years later. He wasn't a stranger to Clare. They had spoken before. They had seen each other at the British Legion Club. He had even been at her 16th birthday event days before she was killed. And after that he showed up at her funeral, blending into the crowd, silently watching her family cry. The more detectives learned, the more certain they became. They had a predator in custody. And they believed he was the one who took Clare's life. On the night of Clare's 16th birthday party at the Legion, just a few days before she was killed, Colin was there with his parents. He celebrated alongside the Tiltmans and their friends, which meant he already knew exactly who Clare was. Maybe that familiarity made him notice her even more in his twisted mind. Or maybe she was simply a girl walking home at the wrong moment and he struck because the opportunity was there. Only Colin will ever know the truth. In December 1995, while Colin waited for trial for the Arches attack, police questioned him again about Clare's murder. By then more than 2 years had passed, but investigators brought out a description of a man seen in 1993. That description came from witnesses, and possibly from Colin's own mysterious tip call that he didn't know police had kept on file. It described a man in his early 20s, about 5'9" or 5'10", with short blonde hair on the sides and back, a round boyish face and wearing a light-colored jacket. The problem for Colin was that this description looked a lot like him in 1993. When detectives showed it to him, he tried to redirect suspicion. He said he recognized the person in the description and claimed it matched a young man he used to see at the Royal British Legion Club, someone who played pool with Clare and who moved away shortly after she died. Colin said he didn't remember the man's name but added that a friend had said the guy lived at the back of me, suggesting a street behind Colin's home. He also claimed he last saw that man at Clare's funeral. Detectives checked this out and found the man Colin was pointing to. But the man had not had blonde hair since the mid-1980s and did not match the timeline at all. In other words, Colin had tried to frame someone who could be completely ruled out. When you put this together with the false tip call he made back in 1993, a very clear pattern appeared. Colin was a manipulator. He was trying to stay a step ahead of police by feeding them lies and confusing the investigation. But the biggest problem for detectives was still his alibi. His mother, Diane, insisted that on the night Clare was killed, Colin was with her delivering Labour Party leaflets and was home by early evening. If that was true, he couldn't have been in the alley at 6:30 p.m. This alibi blocked the investigation for years because Diane wasn't just anyone. She was a respected local councillor and later a mayor. But as police dug deeper, they began to believe the leaflet story was a lie created to protect her son. That strange anonymous tip call after the murder became important. The caller claimed he had been delivering leaflets with his mom and had seen a curly-haired man at 6:30. Investigators eventually discovered the truth. The caller was Colin himself. He had set up the entire story. First he invented a fake suspect. Then he used the same call to plant the idea that he and his mother were out leafleting earlier, so they would appear to be home before the murder took place. In one move he tried to mislead police and create an official record of his own alibi. Once investigators uncovered this, his mother's story looked even more suspicious. It now seemed like a coordinated lie. In 1996, while Colin sat in custody for the other attacks, police finally confronted his parents. It turned out both Diane and her husband, Aubrey, knew that Colin often carried a knife when he went out. After Clare's murder, Aubrey took one particular knife from Colin and got rid of it because he was afraid it might link Colin to the crime. Later, in 1997, Aubrey was charged and convicted for trying to interfere with the investigation. A judge found that he had boiled the knife to remove any blood or evidence, taken it apart, and thrown the pieces away right before police searched their house. He was sentenced to 12 months in prison. The judge said his actions may have destroyed a vital piece of evidence that could have answered the biggest question of all: whether Colin killed Clare. Even after this, the family insisted they were innocent. Outside court, Diane said neither she, her husband, nor Colin had anything to do with Clare's death. But then her own words caused her trouble. On a TV program, she admitted she had been the one to tell her husband to get rid of the knife. She said police were pressuring them and she feared that if investigators found Colin's knife, "You know what the police are like, they'll come and put us away." She told Aubrey, "For Christ's sake, get rid of that bloody knife." That statement aired on television and police had no choice but to act. Diane was arrested too for possibly helping to obstruct the investigation. It's unclear if she was formally convicted, but the damage to her reputation was done. For the public, these details were shocking. Two civic leaders, one a sitting mayor, had apparently helped hide evidence in a murder case. It made people wonder what they really knew. Did they truly think Colin was innocent, or did they quietly suspect the truth and choose to help him anyway? No one knows what they believed in their hearts, but their actions showed they cared more about protecting their son than helping justice for Clare. Meanwhile, Colin's journals revealed even darker behavior. He had a history of becoming obsessed with women and following them for weeks or months. In 2 cases he even broke into their homes. One especially disturbing incident involved a woman named Debbie Jarvis, the wife of a man Colin once worked with. In his diary, which he chillingly titled Assault Plans, he described a violent fantasy about Debbie. He called it the Jarvis attack. One night, knowing Debbie's husband would be at a meeting, Colin tried to break into their house, planning to find her alone. But her husband unexpectedly came home early. He and Debbie found signs that someone had been inside their bedroom. The most frightening discovery was Debbie's nightdress, cut into pieces and hung on the back of the bathroom door. Whoever had been there had staged the scene, possibly preparing for a violent assault. They did not see Colin that night, but later his diary confirmed it was him. The words he wrote in his journal were disturbing in a way that made investigators' stomachs twist. Colin described how, during that break-in at the Jarvis home, he felt trapped inside a dark state of mind. He didn't hide what he wanted to do. In fact, he detailed it with confidence, almost pride. He wrote that his plan was to corner Debbie with a knife and force her to follow whatever he demanded. He claimed he was seconds away from stepping into her room when something happened that he didn't expect. Richard, her husband, came home earlier than planned. That single moment, that sound of the door unlocking, shattered the fantasy Colin had built in his head. He ran before Richard could see him. But in the safety of his own imagination, Colin didn't stop. He even wrote out a pretend story, an entire scene involving Debbie, that he claimed was interrupted by Richard. The disturbing part was that none of it ever happened in real life. It only existed in his mind, yet he wrote about it as if it had been real, as if he had experienced it. The Jarvis family didn't know who had invaded their home at the time, but the fear stayed with them. Someone had been inside their house while they slept. Someone had stood near their bedroom door. Someone with a knife. They never forgot that night. Even behind bars, Colin's imagination didn't soften. In his prison cell, officers later found pages filled with fantasies about a woman he barely knew, someone from years earlier. He had held on to that obsession for nearly 20 years. It was a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Obsession, fixation, and a deep need for control. The more the police read, the clearer it became that Colin wasn't just one troubled young man who had made one terrible choice. His behavior stretched across years. It grew, it spread, and it blended into something far darker than anyone had realized at the time. While Colin served life sentences for the 1988 and 1995 attacks, detectives never closed Clare Tiltman's file. They kept coming back to it again and again, searching for something, anything, that could tie the threads together. There had been two other men at different times who drew police attention, not because of strong evidence but because their lives brushed dangerously close to violent acts. The first was a local man named Peter Rivers. In February 1994, only a year after Clare's death, Rivers ended his mother's life in their home on Walton Road. And then, in the aftermath of his own breakdown, he ended his own life. Before he did, he left behind one confusing line in a note. M was beginning to suspect me of killing Clare. M was believed to be his mother. The sentence was strange, chilling, and confusing. Had his mother truly suspected him? Or was it something he wrote during a moment of mental distress? Was he trying to confess? Or trying to shock? Police couldn't ignore it. They had to look closer. But when they searched for anything linking Rivers to Clare, any signs, any clues, any movements that matched, they found nothing. No timeline. No physical connection. No witnesses. Nothing but that single line in a sad, frantic note. It pointed more to a troubled relationship between a mother and son than to the killing of a teenage girl. So Rivers slipped away from the investigation, a possibility, but not a real match. The second man police examined was far more infamous. Robert Napper. Napper's crimes haunted London in the early 1990s. He was tall, quiet, and deeply disturbed. His attacks were frenzied, targeted, and overwhelmingly violent. He was later connected to the case of Rachel Nichol, a young mother who was stabbed repeatedly in front of her child on Wimbledon Common. And he was linked to the 1993 killings of Samantha Bissett and her 4-year-old daughter, one of the darkest crimes the region had ever seen. Because Napper had targeted women with knives, and because his attacks happened around the same years as Clare's, detectives had to consider him. He lived in Plumstead, not extremely far from Dartford and Greenhithe. In theory, he could have traveled. But there were problems with the theory. Clare's case had no sign of a sexual motive, something present in almost all of Napper's known crimes. There was nothing placing him near the scene. And eventually, investigators felt confident enough to rule him out. Years later, Napper's name would resurface again, but this time as part of Colin Ashsmith's defense strategy, a desperate attempt to point the finger somewhere else. But by the late 1990s, most detectives still believed the same thing they had believed on day one. Colin Ashsmith was the most likely person to have taken Clare's life. Yet they still couldn't prove it. Clare's parents, Cliff and Linda Tiltman, stayed strong through every year of waiting. They had sat through every day of Colin's 1996 trial for the other attacks. They had listened to the things he admitted, the things he wrote, the things he imagined. And deep down, They believed he was the same person who had taken their daughter's life. Time kept moving. But justice did not. Colin remained behind bars. Clare's case remained open. The police had gathered more than 40,000 pages of documents. They had taken over 2,500 statements. They had entered 20,000 names into their case database. Yet there was still no new charge. No trial. No closure. But the memory of Clare never faded. In 2003, 10 years after her death, her family and friends placed a memorial plaque along London Road, near the entrance to the alley where Clare had been found. People paused when they walked by it. Some whispered a prayer. Some cried. Some simply looked at the plaque and remembered a girl whose kindness had touched everyone she met. Then one day someone tore it down. The act of vandalism stunned the entire community. It felt cruel, heartless, and people demanded that it be fixed. The plaque was repaired and placed back where it belonged. They refused to let Clare's memory be destroyed. Her old classmates stayed in touch with her parents. Some still sent Christmas cards even long after school ended. Even teachers reached out, telling Cliff and Linda that Clare would always be remembered with love. Inside the Tiltman home, Clare's photographs were placed carefully on display. Her last school portrait hung near a plaque given to her by the fire station where she volunteered. And beside it was a framed photograph of Detective Chief Inspector Owen Taylor, the man who had led her case for years. DCI Taylor had worked day and night to find Clare's killer. He chased leads long after others had stopped. His dedication never wavered. When he passed away in 1997, it broke the hearts of everyone who knew how hard he had tried. The memorial plaque on London Road carried both names, Clare Tiltman and DCI Owen Taylor. The girl whose life was stolen, and the investigator who spent the rest of his life trying to bring her justice. But justice still hadn't arrived. And then, in 2003, something changed, something none of them could have predicted. A new law. A new possibility. A new chance to finally expose the truth. But before that chance could take shape, something devastating happened to the Tiltman family. The years kept moving forward, but Clare Tiltman's family stayed frozen in the same pain. In 2008, Clare's mother, Linda, passed away from cancer at only 56 years old. She left this world with the case still unsolved. She never heard a verdict. She never saw the person responsible brought to justice. Linda always suspected Colin, but she died without the truth being confirmed. She had carried the weight of that night for 15 long years, and she went to her grave still searching for answers. By 2012, almost 2 decades after Clare's life was taken, only her father, Cliff, remained. Time had not softened anything for him. If anything, the silence in his home felt louder than ever. The 20th year was approaching, but for Cliff, it wasn't just an anniversary. It was a reminder that he had lived almost half his life without his daughter. He decided to speak publicly again. Cameras gathered around him as he stood outside his home, holding a picture of Clare. His voice was thin, tired, but determined. "I've never given up hope," he said. "Never have done, never will do. It's been 17, 18, 19 years. A long time. But I still hope." He talked about what it felt like to live with that kind of loss. How the house felt empty, how he still expected to hear Linda's voice, how he still pictured Clare walking through the front door. He tried to be strong, but there were nights when he shut himself away and cried for an hour, wishing he could turn back time. "She should be 35 now," he whispered. "She's gone. Her mom's gone. There's only me now." His voice cracked when he spoke his final appeal to the public. "I miss her to bits. I can't describe how much I miss my girl. Someone out there knows what happened. Please, do the right thing." A few months later, on September 12, 2012, Cliff passed away at 62 after heart complications. He died still waiting for justice. He never heard the truth. He never knew the full story of what happened to his daughter on that cold January night. When detectives announced his passing, Detective Chief Inspector Rob Vincent spoke openly about the sadness of it. "A good man went to his grave without ever seeing justice for the murder of his only daughter," he said. But he made one thing very clear: the investigation was not over. If anything, he hoped the news would weigh on someone's conscience. Maybe now that both parents were gone, someone would finally speak. And something did begin to shift. On the 20th anniversary of Clare's death in January 2013, her childhood friends, now adults in their mid-30s, organized a candlelit walk. They followed the same route Claire took on the night she was attacked. Dozens of people joined them. The winter air was cold, their breaths misting in the dark, but the glow from the candles made the street feel alive again. Some of the women cried as they walked. Others held hands. When they reached the spot on London Road where Claire collapsed, they formed a circle and held a quiet vigil, remembering the girl they grew up with. A girl full of life, full of plans, full of innocence. Even the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, added his voice. He urged the public to help and promised support for the investigation. Claire's friends were moved. One of them, Emma, said that after so many years the hurt still felt fresh. Another remembered the moment they learned Claire was gone and said, "We blocked it out for so long, and now it's all coming back." For the first time in years, it felt like the case was waking up again. Kent police confirmed they were running a formal cold case review. A special team from the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate began re-examining every part of the case using modern technology. They checked the evidence, retested what they could, and looked for anything new that might help. The hope was simple. Maybe somewhere on Claire's clothing or belongings, there was a tiny trace of the person who attacked her. Something too small for 1990s methods to detect. But nothing meaningful came from the new forensic test. It seemed the killer hadn't left enough behind, or whatever had been left had faded with time. What changed everything wasn't science. It was a voice from the past. In 2013, detectives interviewed a man named Stefan, not his real name, who had once served time in the same prison as Colin. He told them something he had shared long ago but that had never been fully understood. He remembered Colin talking about an attack near a zebra crossing. He remembered Colin saying something had snapped. He remembered Colin describing a young girl. The detail about the zebra crossing was key. That specific crossing was right next to the alley where Claire was attacked, a fact never widely publicized. None of Colin's other attacks happened near a crossing. So why mention it? Detectives realized they were hearing something they had missed the first time. With this new information, police searched the Ashsmith family home again in September 2013. Colin's parents had lived there for years. Neighbors watched as officers carried out new evidence bags, surprised to see the house under investigation again after so long. Inside, officers found something disturbing, an old newspaper from 1994 kept by Colin. It marked the first anniversary of Claire's death. Why would he save that? Why keep a newspaper about a girl he claimed he didn't harm? To detectives, it felt like a trophy, a quiet reminder that he knew exactly what he had done. Even then, Colin's father insisted his son was innocent. But the police were now more confident than ever. They worked closely with the Crown Prosecution Service to build a case that could finally hold up in court. Prosecutor Nigel Pilkington explained what made this case so complex. You couldn't charge someone based only on their past behavior. You needed a clear story. A pattern. Something that showed all the pieces belonged together. And Colin's pattern was impossible to ignore. He stabbed women for no understandable reason. He wrote terrifying things in his diaries. He acted again and again in the same way in the same area. Charlotte Barnard in 1995 was stabbed around 14 times, the same number of wounds Claire suffered. The attacks were random, sudden, frenzied, done to young women in the same small part of Kent, only 2 years apart. What were the chances that two different people committed nearly identical crimes in the same neighborhood? To detectives and prosecutors, there was only one answer. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. This was a pattern. And that pattern pointed straight at one man. Colin Ashsmith. On February 12, 2014, an announcement sent shockwaves through the community. Colin Ashsmith was being charged with the murder of Clare Tiltman. Nigel Pilkington of the Crown Prosecution Service said, "Following a lengthy and complex investigation by Kent Police, I have reviewed all the evidence and concluded that there is sufficient evidence, and it is in the public interest, to charge Colin Ashsmith with Claire's murder." The timing was dramatic. Colin was scheduled for a parole hearing that very day, having served around 18 years for his previous crimes. Instead of the possibility of freedom, he now faced a murder charge that would keep him behind bars for life. Detective Superintendent Rob Vincent, leading the cold case team, added, "Clare Tiltman's unsolved death has remained at the forefront of our minds for over 2 decades. We never gave up. And today, a major step has been taken toward getting justice for Clare." In November 2014, after 21 long years, The case finally came to court. The trial of Colin Ash Smith for Clare's murder began at Inner London Crown Court on November 6. By then 46 years old, Colin pleaded not guilty, continuing to deny involvement in Clare's death. The prosecution, led by QC Brian Altman, presented a methodical and chilling portrait of the man they said was responsible. Altman described Colin as a knife-obsessed loner, taking warped pleasure in attacking women. This was a killing for the sake of killing, he told the jury. Clare had been stabbed from behind at least 9 times. Her attacker had no intention of letting her survive. Altman emphasized the motiveless nature of the crime, linking it to Colin's other known attacks. The court heard about Colin's history of violence. Jurors learned how he nearly killed a woman in 1988 and how he had stabbed Charlotte Barnard 14 times in 1995, just yards from Clare's murder site. Since 1996, Colin had been imprisoned for these crimes. Crucially, the prosecution introduced Colin's own diaries and writings. In his own words, he detailed violent fantasies, rated his attacks, and even referred to himself as an animal, consumed by hatred for women who had humiliated him. Colin also testified in his own defense, admitting to what he called midnight walks with knives, prowling for potential victims. "I would wait for my mom and dad to go to sleep first, then I would go out," he explained. "I was 19 or 20 when I started in 1988. I used to do it quite regularly, hoping I would see someone and provoke someone into attacking me." His claim that he wanted to provoke an attack didn't hold up under scrutiny, as he was always the aggressor. When asked why he committed the 1988 quarry attack, he said, "I wanted to feel empowered, that I had control over someone, that I wasn't a doormat." This glimpse into his psyche revealed a deep well of resentment and inadequacy fueling his violence. Colin admitted he had a complicated relationship with women, claiming he both liked and disliked them, feeling they held power over him and made him worthless. A misogynistic chip on his shoulder that the prosecution argued drove his attacks. Evidence specific to Clare's case was also presented. A witness in 1993 had described a man in a light-colored jacket near the scene. Colin owned a pale beige jacket at the time and had even worn a similar one to Clare's funeral. He had befriended Clare's parents in the aftermath, volunteering to help them grieve, an unsettling act, given his likely role in their suffering. Colin continued to deny the murder, claiming anger at Clare's killer motivated him, even saying he wanted to kill the person responsible. His attempts to appear sympathetic backfired, only highlighting his deceit. Testimony from Colin's former girlfriend described his strange behavior after Clare's death. He was withdrawn, tense, and obsessed with knives, carrying them everywhere and even play-acting attacks. A disturbing habit that exposed his fixation. Another key piece of evidence came from Colin's own missteps. He made an anonymous call the day after the murder, giving a false lead and later altering his story, inadvertently placing himself near the crime scene. This was presented as evidence of consciousness of guilt. Stephen, Colin's former prison cellmate, was a crucial witness. He recounted conversations in which Colin had described an attack that matched Clare's murder, mentioning a zebra crossing near the crime scene. However, under cross-examination, Stephen's testimony faltered. He claimed he might have confused Colin's words with another inmate and that his memory was hazy due to medication. The jury now had to weigh the case's strong circumstantial evidence more heavily. Throughout the trial, Colin's defense tried to create doubt. They pointed out there was no forensic evidence directly linking him to Clare's murder and argued it was unfair to rely on his past crimes. In a bold tactic, they suggested Robert Napper, the infamous Plumstead Ripper, as an alternative suspect, attempting to deflect attention from Colin. After all, Robert Napper had been active in the early 90s, committing frenzied stabbings. The defense suggested, perhaps he wandered into Kent and killed Clare. The prosecution dismissed this theory. Napper's crimes had clear differences, usually involving sexual assault, different victim profiles, and crucially, Napper was not known to be in that area at the time, whereas Colin Ash Smith clearly was. It seemed the defense was grasping at straws, naming a notorious figure without evidence linking him to Clare's murder. They also tried to downplay Colin's diaries as mere fantasy, arguing that imagining violence didn't prove he committed it. But combined with his proximity, opportunity, and his false alibi, the prosecution maintained that the circumstantial evidence strongly pointed to him. Colin Ash Smith continued to deny the murder, But after weeks of testimony detailing his crimes and character, the jury likely found him incredible on nearly every point. Throughout the trial, Clare's friends and extended family filled the courtroom each day, ensuring her presence was felt. Her best friend Lisa even traveled from Scotland to attend. They brought framed photographs of her parents, Cliff and Linda Tiltman, placing them where they could symbolically watch over the proceedings. Their goal was to ensure that Clare's parents, who tragically could not witness justice, were part of the fight in spirit. The trial's emotional weight was immense. Linda Tiltman's cousin Len suffered a stroke in court, overwhelmed by the stress of hearing the brutal details. He was rushed to the hospital and survived, but it underscored the lasting trauma of Clare's murder. Testimony also revealed the role of Colin's mother, Diane, during the initial investigation. Former Mayor Philip Crowe recalled a 1993 meeting with Diane, noting her unusual fixation on a certain car mentioned by police. Retrospectively, it appeared Diane may have suspected her son's white Ford Capri was connected to the crime, adding another piece to the puzzle. Witnesses described Colin's behavior after Clare's death: withdrawn, sullen, avoiding the British Legion Club where Clare's photos were displayed, on edge and prone to sudden aggression. His diaries, admitted under bad character rules, revealed chilling planning for other attacks, aborted only by his own hesitation. "Lucky for her I bottled it," he wrote coldly. The jury could see he was capable of murder. After a 5-week trial on December 11, 2014, the jury retired to deliberate. Only 3.5 hours later they returned. Colin Ash-Smith was told to stand. The verdict: guilty of the murder of Clare Tiltman. Colin, who had evaded justice for 21 years, showed no emotion. In contrast, tears flowed among Clare's friends. Relief mingled with sorrow that her parents were not alive to witness the moment. Colin refused to attend sentencing, ignoring victim impact statements entirely, a final act of cowardice. Justice was delivered by Mr. Justice Sweeney, who imposed life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years, to be served consecutively with his previous sentences. The judge emphasized the premeditated, cruel nature of the crime and the devastating impact on Clare's family and friends, praising the perseverance of police and prosecutors who never gave up. Statements from Clare's loved ones were read aloud. Her best friend, Lisa, spoke of the daily pain of her loss. Her uncle Roger lamented how the family's hopes and dreams ended the night Clare was murdered. Though Cliff and Linda had passed, the words brought a sense of closure. Justice, though delayed, had been achieved. Colin Ash-Smith appealed his conviction, claiming the admission of his past crimes and diaries prevented a fair trial. In November 2015, the Court of Appeal dismissed it summarily, calling the appeal unarguable. With that, all legal avenues were exhausted. Colin would remain in prison for life, likely never released. Even in the aftermath, his father's death in 2016 stirred controversy over whether Colin should attend the funeral. Ultimately, he did not. Meanwhile, Clare's friends and the Justice for Clare group celebrated a bittersweet triumph. They had campaigned for years, keeping Clare's story alive until justice was finally served. Clare's legacy lives on in memorials across her community. Green Hive named a road Clare Tiltman Avenue, and another thoroughfare was renamed Tiltman Avenue in 2022. A memorial bench and the Clare Tiltman Center, an eco-hub for youth projects in Stone, were established, creating spaces that celebrate her life and passions. On the 30th anniversary of her death in January 2023, the local parish council planted special Clare roses, living reminders of her memory that will bloom year after year. Her story has been told in documentaries, books, and articles. It remains heartbreaking but also inspiring, proof of the persistence of friends, community, and law enforcement. Clare Tiltman's murder shows the worst of humanity in the cruelty of her killer, but also the best in the devotion and courage of those who refused to let her be forgotten. After 21 years, justice caught up with evil. Clare's killer was unmasked and condemned, ensuring he could never harm anyone else. While nothing can bring her back, the truth prevailed. Today, if you walk through Green Hive or Stone, you'll see reminders of Clare. A road sign, a plaque, blooming roses. She is woven into the fabric of her hometown. Her friends can now remember her smile and laughter without unanswered questions looming. Clare's story is a reminder that cold cases can be solved, that that persistence matters and that justice, though delayed, is never denied. We honor Clare Tiltman, her friends, and those who tirelessly pursued this case. If her story moved you, pay tribute in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Cold Case Desk to ensure that stories like Clare's are never forgotten. Justice may take decades, but the truth is worth the wait.